Welcome into another episode of the Autzen Audibles podcast. It's Rutgers preview time. Erik Skopil, student star reporter John Evans here, coming at you here a little after 3:30 on Thursday, a couple days before this game. Neither of us will be in Piscataway for this one, unfortunately. There was talks. We looked into it. Travel very expensive. Didn't end up making sense. We're kind of taking all that money. We're harboring it, hopefully, for postseason play. We'll see if that ends up being wise or not. But that's the plan. So, unfortunately, no on-ground coverage. I wanted to get that out the way off the top. We're going to dive into these matchups, the importance of this game as a bounce-back opportunity for an Oregon program that was, I think, once they beat Penn State, maybe people thought they'd be undefeated going into this game. That's not the case. And then a couple other things. Obviously, back half of the show, we'll do some props. We're sticking with the going to social media to other avenues for that, which will be kind of fun. Kind of jump through some thoughts there, and then finishing up with our game prediction, score prediction, kind of explaining how we think it's going to go. Trying to do much better than last week when we both picked the wrong team by a lot of points. I think we went a combined 1 for 9 on the props. I went 0 for 5 on my Skopil column. So only direction is up, John.
Yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there. Just like the Ducks, tough week for us last week. So got to bounce back this week.
There is a correlation when we are predicting Oregon to win by like double figures and they lose, that probably all of our assessments of how individual components will go.
Yeah, no, it makes sense there.
It may just be a little bit off. John, I'll start with this. We spoke after Saturday's game extensively, breaking down kind of what we saw. I know Dan doesn't want to stay on Indiana. He made that pretty clear on Wednesday. I don't think we need to spend too much time here. I'm just wondering, I've had an opportunity on a couple different shows to kind of explain where my head is at after rewatching. I know you've obviously done an extensive film review of your own. Where's kind of your head at? What lingering thoughts do you have there? And then we'll move into some Rutgers stuff.
I mean, we saw the news today that Cignetti just signed a huge new contract to keep him in Indiana and not headed to Penn State or anywhere else. So I mean, that's exactly why he deserved that, because they came in there. Indiana came into Autzen with a game plan that was ready to beat the Ducks. They did things that Oregon clearly wasn't ready for, in terms of things like James Crepey was asking the other day about those sim pressures and the blitzes that Indiana brought against Oregon. But yeah, they just looked like so much better of a football team than I think a lot of us were expecting to see out there. Just not even just how ready they were, but they have dudes. They have dudes that I just didn't realize how good those guys really were, like Aiden Fisher at linebacker and stuff. So that Indiana team, that team is really good. And the main takeaway of it for me is that I thought expectations kind of were reset back to similarly where they were at the beginning of the season, where it kind of felt like this team might be a year away, where they're going to be competitive this year, but it might be that year 2 of the more connection and having those guys, Brandon Finney and all the young guys in this team next year taking that leap. I think expectation is kind of back to where it started at the beginning of the season, where this team is very good. If things fall right, they could absolutely find themselves in national championship contention and will be in that playoff conversation, but not necessarily in the same talks as teams like Ohio State, where Miami looks to be right now and where Indiana has been.
One thing I should say, and good point there, and kind of refocusing the expectations a little bit. I did see Josh Pate and several others still pick Oregon to be playing for a national championship, despite what happened last week. I don't think big picture, the people that know the sport the best have soured on Oregon maybe as quickly as some in the fan base have. I mean, I've seen it's so funny being in this position. It's kind of reading comments and seeing takes on social media. There's a contingent of people that think Oregon is now going to lose 2 to 3 games. There's a contingent that thinks the whole Indiana thing is being overblown. It probably, like normally, kind of fits somewhere in the middle. But I certainly haven't changed my expectations in terms of, like, I definitely think this can still, without question, be a college football playoff team. And if everything falls into place, this was kind of my storyline, kind of narrative going into the season, was maybe they won't be playing their best football in October, but there's so much talent on this team that it wouldn't surprise me by December. This is one of the toughest outs. And this is a team that you see in a college football playoff matchup, maybe as a lower seed, or I should say a higher seed, that is just a terrifying matchup. So I don't disagree with anything that you've said there, John. That's for sure.
And you're playing a new game in college football in 2025 compared to where it has been the past decade. Things got changed last year, and Ohio State was able to capitalize on an inflection point in a Michigan game that they lost and become better and fix some of those things. So I think that's, that's what this is for the Ducks, is can they correct those things over the second half of the season, because Indiana exposed some faults offensively, defensively. Indiana just came with a better plan, like Dan said, but it's can you correct those things over the last half of this season to feel like you're ready when it is December and January.
Oregon's lost 6 games, or should say 7 now, with Dan Lanning as the head coach. They've yet to lose consecutive. I was running through this here. I'll just kind of power through this, and we'll turn a little bit more to Rutgers. But after they lost to Georgia in 2022, next week they beat Eastern Washington 70-14, went on I believe 8-game win streak. 2022, they'd end up losing to Washington, followed up with a win over Utah, lose to Oregon State the week later. The end of that season was just all over the place. And then they did follow that up with the win in the Holiday Bowl over North Carolina. 2023, they lose to Washington. Then they beat Washington State, rattle off, I think, it's 7 consecutive games. Lose to Washington in the Pac-12 championship game, beat Liberty in the Fiesta Bowl. And then obviously a year ago, undefeated going into that game in Pasadena, lose that game. And then they begin this year with 5 straight wins. So 3 of these 7 losses have resulted in 5 or more game win streaks following. So there's no reason this team can't get hot and do the same thing. Obviously, it starts this week with Rutgers. I think for me, and probably most people who are invested in this program to some degree, are more interested in what the offense does this week. But I will say, John, it's interesting kind of looking at this. Like, Rutgers mirrors Oregon in an interesting way, where I would imagine most people feel like Oregon's offense is maybe the bigger question mark. Defense they feel a little bit better at. Well, Rutgers offense is about as dynamic as you're going to play all season, and Rutgers defense is maybe the worst defense on the schedule, or certainly of the teams in the conference play. Let's start with Oregon on offense, because I feel like this has the opportunity to be a get-right week for an offensive unit led by a quarterback who needs to get right. This is my big question coming out of last week, is where's Dante Moore's head at? This is a Rutgers defense that he can absolutely have a ton of success against.
Yeah, the Scarlet Knights have struggled this year, and especially to defend the pass. Their secondary is just a weak group, and they don't really get after the quarterback that much. And that's what obviously Indiana was really able to do last week to disrupt Dante Moore. Rutgers isn't a team that's going to send as many of those complicated blitzes and the looks that are rotating at the last second in coverage that were confusing Dante Moore on Saturday. But there's going to be more of that than they have had in their game plans, sure, because they saw it on film from Indiana. But they're just not going to have those players to execute at as high of a level. So like you said, I think get right game is absolutely the message that it should be for Dante Moore, because he has an opportunity to go out there and have a 300-yard, 3-touchdown game, kind of get that Heisman talks conversation, just the momentum he felt like he had after that Penn State game back on track, where you feel like this is a quarterback that can match up against anybody in the nation and go head to head and kind of give you that one-on-one advantage, where at the end of the game, you feel like you can trust your guy to go make a drive. He wasn't that guy on Saturday against Indiana, but he has the potential to be that. So it's just, it's a lot of it is building confidence, because so much of that game was Dante's confidence falling apart when the offensive line would break down, or he wasn't reading things out correctly, and then he wasn't confident in his decision making necessarily. So it's just gaining that back and kind of finding that momentum again.
This is the worst defense statistically against the pass in the Big Ten, giving up about 249 yards per game. You said Dante Moore over 300 yards feels plausible. That's one of my Skopil Dominus. Again, a little tease. That's one of my predictions for this week's column. I think that also will be a tease for a prop later in the show. But I'm going back to and I know there's just not a lot of reference points to how he responds to a tough game unless you go back to 2023. So we're going to do that here. The way he started that season at UCLA, his first 3 games against lesser competition, was really strong. I think people forget that. 7 touchdowns, 1 interceptions. They won all 3 games by 2 or more scores, a couple of them by a lot more than that. And then things kind of started to unravel. Against Utah, 1 touchdown interception, they lose. Against Washington State in a win, which is probably one of his better statistical games, he still throws a touchdown, 2 interceptions. And then Oregon State, this is where things just completely imploded. 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions. And I bring that up not to say or suggest that that's where this is headed, but just to say the track record with him and how he's responded, at least at the other school he was at, wasn't great. He also ended up resuming the starting job later in the season against Cal, or at least played through 38 pass attempts in that game. 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions there. So the track record hasn't been great. I will also say against this type of a defense, it feels like an opportunity to feast. And I think one thing I am also curious about is just what does Will Stein do to counter some of this? Because it felt like, and we were pretty critical of him on Saturday's show. I think maybe even a touch more than we needed to be after kind of rewatching some of it. I don't know if you agree or disagree, John. I'll let you answer that in a second.
Yeah.
But I think there's no reason a coordinator like him can't find some counters, find some ways to make things work more effectively and efficiently for Dante to take some of the pressure off him. Because again, my worry would be this is a guy who maybe felt like he had to do too much, and that was what happened at UCLA, and that's where things kind of started to snowball. I don't necessarily expect that to be the case, and this is a good matchup to kind of, I guess, end that kind of concern. But I certainly feel like Will needs to draw up a better game plan. Again, I don't think it was terrible, capital T against Indiana, but this is one where he needs to be on his A game, I think.
I think he should just be trying to do things to help Dante just feel better back there, especially early in this one. Give him easy completions, give him easy right. reads that he can not even necessarily just like screen passes and stuff like that, but short ones 5 yards down the field where he can get a completion. You feel like you're moving the ball and stuff like that. I didn't think the play calling was terrible against Indiana. Obviously, they did things well at certain points. It's just they couldn't find anything that could really consistently work. And then, right. like you said, they didn't have those answers when Indiana would shut down some of the things that had been working for them all season, like the outside runs with T.R. Hill. They couldn't get that going at all against Indiana. But I think to like yesterday when we were talking to Poncho, and he's mentioned how they had a protection meeting, whereas the quarterbacks, the running backs, the tight ends, the offensive line, everybody in there talking and trying to figure things out. And I think those are going to be the keys to making Dante Moore feel more comfortable. Just having, being able to give, like for Will Stein, being able to have an extra tight end on the line who can provide a chip and be ready in case Dante Moore needs to slide it or change it to a 7-man protection or a 6-man protection, depending on what he's seeing from the defense. So I think it's got to be working together to kind of just take that off of Dante and make it not feel like it should all be on him to have, obviously it is on him a lot of the time too. And they've talked about how that's something that you don't see that often from a 20-year-old quarterback, is being the guy to make the protections, make the checks at the line of scrimmage. But you got to take a little bit of that off of him and make him feel comfortable within this offense, that he feels like he can do the things that he needs to do, which is just, moving the ball downfield consistently, not putting yourself in danger, or if you're flushing the pocket if you don't need to, and things like he was doing on Saturday.
This is an oversimplification, but if we're talking about defensive personnel for Rutgers, they have 2 guys on PFF whose grades are in green. They have 10 guys in offense in green. So that just tells you kind of where the strengths of this team are. I think one of the things I was kind of focused in the offseason, looking at them, they added a couple of edge guys from lower levels who are expected to come in and kind of solidify this pass rush. Eric O'Neill from James Madison, Bradley Weaver from Ohio. These guys just haven't really gotten it done. We had Bobby Darren from Scarlet. Oh gosh, I'm going to butcher the name of the site, but from our Rutgers 24/7 site. Apologies for that, Bobby. You did a great job. But his point was kind of like, he thinks those guys have been kind of a disappointment. That the expectation was much higher for what those 2 guys were expected to bring, and I think the production kind of bears out. O'Neill doesn't have a lot of counting stats, I will say, but he does have 21 pressures on the season, which is not a terrible number by any means. 6 games into a season, he's averaging just under 4 per game. I kind of going back to why this is a favorable matchup is, this is not a team that is known to run a lot of sim pressures. That was something Dan certainly made sure Crepia was aware of when he was asking that question, right? He kind of pushed back if you watch them play. But it's also like you said, shouldn't be a surprise if they try a little bit more. I also I'm also just wary, I guess, that they actually have the personnel to make it matter. I think one of the things you mentioned, being impressed with what Indiana had, you mentioned Aiden Fisher. They had way more edge talent and ability just to beat guys and just to get home than I expected. Again, a lot of that was based upon scheme. I'm not sure that Rutgers has that, or at least they haven't shown it this year. If they are going to show it, it's going to be O'Neill and Weaver. Those are the 2 names to know. What's your sense of kind of that pass rush and its ability to get home? Because statistically, this is not a defense that has really proven it can do it.
Yeah, what Rutgers was able to do really well was not only were they able to create 3 rushers by bringing those blitzes or bringing those sim pressures, but they were also able to give their guys one-on-ones by bringing, if they brought 5, then all of Oregon's offensive linemen get matched up one-on-one. They have to protect. and then being able to win those one-on-ones with guys like Kamara off the edge. Rutgers doesn't have guys who can win those one-on-ones to the same level that Indiana does, and that's where the advantage lies for Oregon. It will give Dante more time back there to operate and feel comfortable. Because you just got to have guys like Kamara was a beast on Saturday. I was really impressed with the way he was able to. I mean, for a sixth-year guy, he's been around in college football for so long. He's just powerful in a way that some of Oregon has. Not with the group they have now, but when you just younger players in general, you got 18, 19, and 20-year-olds. These guys just don't have the muscle mass that a guy like Kamara, who's 23, 24, has built up through his time in college. And it showed on Saturday because he was able to get into Isaiah World's chest and push him back into Dante on a couple of those plays. And Rutgers just doesn't have those kind of guys who can win those one-on-one opportunities. So I think, especially when you do have offensive tackles, offensive linemen like Pregnon, like World, who have been, for the most part, very, very solid. And it's not a lot of things that can get past them. I think you should have plenty of time for Dante Moore back there to throw.
Last thing I have on Oregon offense going into this, and I'll throw it to you, John, if you have any other kind of lingering thoughts, but I find it to be imperative going into this one that you kind of do what Will has preached his whole career, which is feed the studs. It didn't feel like there was enough concerted effort, especially with the Corey Moore, Kenyon Sadiq in particular, to just get them involved early. Like Sadiq, I thought it was great in the second half. The first play they ran was just like an easy drag route for Sadiq for like a 15-yard gain or first down or whatever that was, that they started there because they knew that he had to get him involved. I think that needs to be first quarter stuff of finding ways to incorporate those two players in particular. I think the touch count was too low. I'm sure Indiana was keyed in on those guys, just like the two of us would be trying to build up a game plan, knowing how talented those guys are. So certainly part of that was their desire and success in taking that away. This is a game where you got to be able to find those two players in particular in the pass game. You mentioned kind of finding ways to make things easier on Dante. These are the kind of players you have that are undoubtedly Sunday players. I think both those guys are going to be first round NFL draft picks. Kenyon, as soon as this next coming draft. You've got to find ways to incorporate both of those guys and get those guys going early. Like, you'd love that first drive to be at least a couple touches, or maybe one or two or three for those two combined, just because we know they can win after the catch. We know they can win before the catch. We know they can do so many things, and it just felt like that was kind of a missed opportunity against Indiana to build some momentum, to build some confidence for a young quarterback who clearly was in need of some of that by the second half.
Both of those guys are players that you really do notice when they're not making an impact necessarily, because they have such highlight and flash plays when they are getting the ball in their hands. That when all of a sudden you're like, wait, I don't think I've seen Kenyon Sadiq do anything this entire first half. That's not the way Oregon wants to operate things. I agree with you. I think they should be trying to get those guys just find that connection early to kind of establish that early on in the game. And then the other thing with the pass catchers, I was interested in the fact that Malik Benson had caught that deep shot early, but only played, I think it was 10 to 15 snaps throughout that entire game. And they went to Jeremiah McClellan throughout much of the middle parts of that game, the second and third quarter. Benson's just another level of deep threat and in terms of his ability to stretch things vertically and where that opens things up in the intermediate area underneath. I think McClellan's a really good player. He's really good at the catch point, and that's been something that Dan has talked about. We've seen it on the touchdown he had earlier this season, but he doesn't have that just burning speed that a guy like Benson has to stretch the field like that. And then you're asking more to be more of your field stretcher, which you don't want necessarily, because it's not that he can't do that. He has top tier speed, but you want to just be getting the ball to him and not using him as much of that clear out player. So I think it'd be interesting to see, especially in a game like this where you think you can take advantage of Indiana's secondary, if you have Benson a little more out there and try to stretch it and hit some of those, hit a deep shot to him, or even just the early in that game, they were trying to, hit those crossing routes over the middle that Indiana was really shutting down, but maybe Rutgers might not be able to do.
Yeah, Benson 15 snaps in that game, McClellan 36. It was a big difference from previous weeks. That's something to kind of monitor is that the personnel decisions there. And I think if you're trying to be critical of Stein of away from some of the play design, some of the game plan, it would be some of the personnel decisions in terms of who was playing a lot. And you mentioned Dier earlier as somebody who they shut him down. He 3 carries, I think -3 yards. He was not involved. This is a game where you'd love to get some explosives out of him against a team that it feels like it's possible to do that with. Anything else on offense?
I think something with like De'Aaron Hill too. I think it was Jeff Schwartz mentioned this on Twitter earlier this week. I saw like he talked about De'Aaron Hill being in there so often as a guy to create those explosives on the ground that as soon as Indiana saw him on the game, they were keyed for those outside zone runs, the counter runs that Oregon's been able to go to get those explosives from Hill. So I think you just gotta. I think in somewhat you do have to just mix up that personnel at running back a little more. And then the other thing too, I think just establishing that ground game because Oregon was able to find it at times in the second quarter with Jordan Davison, but really went away from it late in that game, was not able to get anything, even though we felt like watching things back, they did run the ball pretty well between the tackles. They were able to get, a pretty good push from their guards at certain points, but really went away from it late in that game where we're counting on Dante to drop back and try to make plays with his arm the entire time instead of letting him get into these easier situations. So the air is the area to attack against this Rutgers defense, but you still got to establish that ground game, especially after a game where it really, really got away from it late in that one when you were hurting.
One final stat, apologies for belaboring this, but this really stood out just in kind of doing some scout of Rutgers. They've been awful in the second half on both sides of the ball, but especially defense. Like this stat is kind of astounding. In Big Ten play, opposing teams have scored points on 10 of 13 drives and touchdowns on 8 of 13. And the 10 of 13 includes a missed 40-yard field goal by Iowa. So that's like 11 out of 13 where the opposing offense had a chance to score or did score. That stands out as like this is a defense in the second half that for whatever reason is not making adjustments or is not able to figure things out. They aren't very good in the first half, but the second half is especially bad. So that's something to monitor here is if Oregon creates early separation, it could be a game where it really, that really separates in the second because of Rutgers' inability to make some stops.
And that's something that I didn't when I first looked at this Rutgers team before I really dove into some of their games and stuff a little bit more. I was expecting them to be based on the fact I saw they had a bad defense. Calic Manis was putting up some pretty big numbers offensively. I was expecting them to be getting behind early and then trying to catch up. But yeah, the fact that the defense has almost come out with that energy and then faded late, I think that could be something that the Ducks do take advantage of in the second half. If they start just pounding the ball with Davison up the middle, and being physical and stuff like that, you're going to wear on a defense like Rutgers.
You mentioned him, Autzen Audibles. I think that's pretty good for somebody who's been practicing that all week for this very moment. He's a veteran quarterback. This is start 36. This is by far his best statistical year. And kind of doing some read up on him. I think this is a quarterback who is maybe a little bit more dual threat, leg driven, almost even more of a runner than a passer early in his career. This year, he's really found something. I think a lot of it has to do with the skill talent on the outside, which I know we're going to talk about extensively. But Rutgers has been really strong in the first half. Even in their 3 Big Ten losses, this is a team that's 0-3 in Big Ten play. They led in 2 of them, and they were tied in the other. This is a team that's been very competitive early on in games. I would just fair warning, like I wouldn't be surprised if Oregon is leading by a small margin or they're tied. You'd hate for them to be in a deficit for a second straight week, but for whatever reason, they've started games off really strong, including that game at Washington, which I watched parts of the first half, ended up focusing, I'm sure John did the same, on the Mariners game 5 of the ALDS for the whole second half. So just kind of was scoreboard watching, and Washington dominated that second half, scored touchdowns in every drive, and I think Rutgers scored 6 points. So it wasn't a very competitive second half, but there were some moments there watching it where I was going, this is not a team to overlook on that side of the football.
They do a good job with their game scripts coming out early and being able to kind of let Calic Manis find that rhythm. I mean, we've talked about the receivers. They got 2 guys in Duff and now I'm blanking on the name. Strong. Who are Strong 6'3", like 215, Duff 6'6", 225. Those guys are 1 and 2 in the country in contested catches this year, and Calic Manis likes to throw it up and let his playmakers have a chance to make a play. But Rutgers also has done things well on the ground. Antoine Raymond, 9 touchdowns this year, rushing. They've been good in the red area when they get it and being able to run in that. So they come out at teams early and they have that offensive explosion where because they have the receivers who can make those big plays downfield, they hit a 30 to 40 play deep shot to a guy like Duff or Strong, and all of a sudden that can really change a drive and make you feel the pressure of this offense. So I think, like you said early on, they could make Oregon feel a little bit with some of those deep threats being able to run the ball, but as things wear on, I think eventually like the pressure will start to get home for Oregon. I think guys like Mateo Uyunglele, Tatum Tuioti had a really awesome game against Indiana. I thought he was my favorite defensive player besides Brandon Finney coming out of that game. I would not mind seeing like a Tatum Tuioti 2-sack game or something like that. If like kind of like a little breakout party for him, because his pass rush continues to get better every week.
Yeah, this is a game where I was just looking. The over-under is now at 60.5. I'm not going to tell anybody how to gamble. I don't really do it much, and when I do it poorly. It screams over to me to a certain extent, not because I think Oregon's defense is bad by any means. I thought Oregon's defense played probably more admirably than some people want to give them credit for against Indiana. Things kind of unraveled at the end there. That response drive after the Finney touchdown by Indiana, I think, was a bit of a backbreaker. Definitely a bit of a demoralizing, deflating sequence there where they just couldn't get off the field, multiple third down opportunities. This Rutgers offense just has some talent. I think all three of those skill guys we're talking about, Strong, Duff, Raymond, are NFL players. I don't think there's much question. I'm not saying these are like first, second round draft picks. I know Oregon has a much more impressive allotment of NFL draft picks on their team. I think there are 3 players currently projected by Mel Kiper to go in the first 21 picks of the NFL draft as of a couple of days ago. I was looking at that with Dante, with Kenyon, and with Amari Washington. But this is a group of guys that could cause problems, and I'm fascinated for another week here to see. And it's tough because you're coming off a game where Elijah Surratt just did kind of whatever he wanted and was the best player, I think, on the field for that game. I don't know if anybody's really going to argue that. Certainly the most difficult receiver match Oregon's had in a while. These guys on the outside are like going to be really interesting to see how they match up with Oregon's corners. Brandon Finney, I feel good about. I think everybody should. And John did a great story. I'll let him relay some of the data that he put in that story in a second here. I don't know how good I feel about the other corner. I certainly didn't feel good about whoever was matched up on Surratt for most of that game. They threw 4 different guys. I think Finney even had a little bit of run against him, but they really rotated and didn't really see. I don't know who or cornerback 2 is right now. You think cornerback 1 is a guy who is one of the best corners in the country as a true freshman. I think you look at cornerback 2 and go, talented young players, guys with some experience. Nobody really looked very good last game. I also don't want to overreact too much because previous to that, the statistics were about as good as anybody in the country from a cornerback on outside receiver perspective. But it certainly felt like some things were exposed there. And this is another offense that can certainly create some issues.
And like you said, with the 2 of these guys, you're going to have your corner 2 making plays because you can't, even though they didn't go to it last week where we thought maybe they should have at times, just sticking Finney on a guy like Surratt, you can't stick Finney on both Duff and Strong at the same time. So either Theron Johnson, Ifeoma Degu, these guys are going to get challenged out there. I don't know if Rutgers receivers are necessarily as clean separators and they're not going to have a quarterback as on time as Mendoza was throughout that game. Cali Manis is good, but that's what makes Mendoza so good is his timing and stuff in that offense, being able to get it to the sideline in the perfect spot for Surratt. But you're going to have some plays from guys like Ifeoma Degu and Theron Johnson. I thought the issue for Johnson at times was just that Surratt was winning with his routes more so than even his physicality, but then he was able to use that physicality and he made Ifeoma Degu look like a redshirt freshman playing out there at corner at times, which I don't know if Rutgers' guys will necessarily do, but you just got to have a little bit more. I don't know. I thought that he was just it was a physical mismatch at times with Surratt and Obadegwu specifically. So I think that's the matchup I'm definitely looking for against these Rutgers corners. How the Johnson and Obadegwu combination can handle these receivers.
I'm wondering if we see more of Sione Laulea just because he is big and long, and maybe that's a preferred matchup against the size on the outside of Strong and Duff. You mentioned it earlier. I'll just kind of reiterate it. These are the top 2 players, both in contested catches, but also contested attempts, if you will, which speaks to your point earlier of like I also included like Surratt only has 11 contested attempt opportunities on the year. These guys have a combined 37. Strong has 19, Duff has 18. 12 catches for Strong in those situations, 11 for Duff. That kind of, I think, outlines what you're saying, though, where Surratt's a guy who wins with separation. The defenders aren't always around him when the ball is in the air. He's able to, and we saw that all throughout the game against a variety of different coverages of just players turned around, and he's basically catching the ball while their backs to him. This is a matchup where you're hoping of Finney, some of that size on the outside is able to combat that. Like I said, I'm curious and a little bit concerned about these matchups on the outside. I do think Oregon has so much offensive firepower against a bad defense that I don't know how worried you need to be overall about like losing this game. But if the path to this going really wonky would be you just can't maintain anything against these two guys, and they go up and make a bunch of tough catches and do what they were able to do in that first half against Washington, where at times it felt like they were maybe going to be in position to pull an upset on the road.
I think it's just going to be interesting too to see what kind of coverage approach Oregon tries to take against these receivers, because they played a ton of off coverage against Surratt, trying to catch him 7 to 8 yards and then work from there. And Surratt did really good separating just at the top of that at his stem at like 10 yards or so, be able to get back to the sideline. But against Penn State, Oregon played press almost on all of their like third downs, third and longs, times they knew Penn State needed to pass, because you could tell they were not scared of what Kyron Hudson, Devontae Ross, these Penn State receivers were going to do to them on these third downs. And it could have also potentially had something to do with Drew Aller there as well. But if I think it'll be interesting to just see how Oregon tries to play this. Do they want to play off coverage and make sure they're not going to get beat over the top by anything, or do they want to get up and use a guy like Finney, 6'2" length that he has, disrupt strong at the line of scrimmage and try to jam them early and not let them be able to get to the spots they want that Cali McManus can throw them those jump balls.
And because of all these contested catches, it feels like turnovers are very much in play here. I was actually surprised when you see 37 contested catches just amongst those two players. That's only 3 interceptions this year for Cali McManus. You would think with that, and that's 36 times that he's basically thrown it up, and it's not been a position where it's been, a clean catch. And yet only 3 of them have gone for turnovers. I wonder if this is a repeat Finney interception game. Maybe you come away excited because some of these the cornerback twos that are playing, some of those players make a couple plays and make some interceptions, create some turnovers. Like Rutgers threw for 386 yards last week against Washington. They scored 19 points, and that was an inability in the red zone. It was also some issues there with just I guess putting the ball up for jeopardy a little bit more than they would have liked. The run game here, I don't know how much we want to hit this. Because I know we want to definitely jump into the props and prediction segment here in a moment, but we have to talk Antoine Raymond, because this has been one of the best running backs in the Big Ten. You touched on it before. This guy is 4th in the conference in rushing yards, 2nd in rushing touchdowns. He's been, like last week, I think had a pretty good number of receptions. I want to say it was like 6 or 7. This is a absolute playmaker. It's a true sophomore who, again, if you listen to our Bobby Darin podcast, Talk at Rutgers, a guy who should be maybe a true freshman this year. He should have been a senior in high school a year ago when he was backing up Kyle Monungai. This is a player who's really exploded. PFF's number 4 graded running back in the country, very dynamic. I know Dan kind of went into detail talking about some of the different run assignments and things that they do that kind of fit in with his skill set. This is not a super prolific rush offense overall. Like it's one of the best pass offenses in the country, in the conference, I think 4th in the Big Ten and 12th in the country in terms of pass offenses. They're nowhere near that from a rush perspective, but it's certainly a guy you have to be very much aware of. And if they can get both things clicking, that's where you run into some issues, kind of like what we saw at times against Indiana. Although I will say, I think Oregon's defense bottled up the rush attack for decent parts of this game, except for a couple moments late when it kind of bit them.
I was going to mention that as well, because you look at the numbers, they come out overall. Indiana's 37 carries, 111 yards. That's 3 yards per carry. So they weren't super efficient on the ground. It just felt like they converted on the ground whenever in the biggest moments, like on the third downs they needed to and stuff like that. But overall, I thought Oregon's run defense did play a pretty solid game, especially, the interior of that defensive line, I think, has been one of the biggest strengths of this team over the past couple of weeks. We got to talk to Bear Alexander this week for the first time, but he's a guy that's really emerged since even that Penn State game. But even before that, I thought he was one of the better guys against the run on this interior. I think it's just going to be stopping that early and not letting Rutgers feel like they can give the ball to Raymond and move the ball down the field and kind of feel comfortable with their running game. If you can stop it early and force Cali McManus into a 3rd and 10, 3rd and 11 early in this game, I think that's going to be key, because then you could potentially have him making mistakes, and then they're not going to be wanting to give the ball to Raymond as much if they're feeling like they're behind in the game script.
If you kind of look through this as well, this is a game where I could definitely see Oregon getting home a little bit. Especially at tackle. I was looking at this. Taj White has given up 18 pressures so far this year. Tyler Needham, the other tackle, has given up 9. A lot of and it's not a huge number of sacks in totality this year compared to others, especially for a team that is throwing the ball with this kind of regularity. But I do wonder how much Oregon can get home, especially against like what we talked about earlier, where Indiana is a timing passing offense, get the ball out quick. Rutgers is let's have our guys run down the field and throw jump balls to them kind of an offense, kind of almost a little bit like Stanford-ish from a decade ago with some of the size on the outside. That does open you up, if you can't protect, to some issues. And I guess I'm curious to see with what Oregon has and kind of the inability a week ago to make much of an impact there. Like you mentioned the name earlier, Tatum Tuioti comes to mind. I'm also fascinated by like Mateo Uiagalelei, who I think was kind of quieter than people had anticipated going into that game. We highlighted the potential advantages Oregon had in the pass rushing situations. They certainly had some moments, like Amari Washington just bowled over their right guard at one point. I think his last name was Bray Lynch, I think, right? I think that was actually.
Yes, first name Bray.
First name Bray, last name Lynch. Either way, like felt like there were some advantages that weren't taken in totality there. I wonder if this is a game where we see a little bit of that shift. Do you have anything on that, or anything else, kind of last thoughts about when Oregon's defense is on the field?
I think Mateo Uiagalelei could stand to have a more sizable impact than he did against Indiana. Carter Smith was awesome for Indiana in that game at left tackle, and he's been a guy that I was looking at. The Athletic just released their midseason like All-Americans, and they had him first team All-American at left tackle because he's just been really solid over there protecting that blind side from Mendoza. So I thought Indiana did a really good job at that. They shut down Uiagalelei, who's the most prolific edge rusher, pass rusher guy that gets after the quarterback on this team. So if he could have a more sizable impact in this game, and like you said, with the weaknesses at tackle, him and Tuioti, that combination, if they can scheme some things up for those guys potentially even, and bring a guy like Betcher, Jackson, Mixon to run at those tackles and confuse them, you could definitely get a lot of pressure after Cali McManus.
Yeah, Taj White, who I mentioned earlier, is their right tackle. His pass rush grade is 41.4 on PFF, which is bad last time I checked. We're going to take a quick break here. We'll come back. We'll do some props. We'll do some final game picks, kind of run through some other things before we wrap this up and get ready for Saturday's game. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles podcast. We mentioned it before. I think John went 1-4 on these prop picks last week. I went 0 for 5. We were kind of recapping that on the walk back from the press box of like, yeah, we didn't nail this game at all. Let's see if we can do a little bit better.
We also both picked Oregon to win by double digits. So like we said at the beginning, there were things we didn't see coming with that one in general.
We've gone out. We've requested some questions from Twitter, now X, and also some from the DuckTerritory message board, the Duck Pond. So there's a little collection, a little mix here. We're going to start with a prop from @Josh_Coleman35. Can Bryce do it again? Over under 9.5 tackles for Betcher. I put it out there on social media earlier in the week. Betcher has had a double-digit tackles 3 straight games. The first player to do that since, I don't know if you saw the tweet or not, John, Troy Dye back in, I think it was 2018 or 2017. It's been a while since somebody has put up kind of this sort of a tackle collection in consecutive games like this. He's on pace to be the first 100 tackle player of that Lanning era. That's a number they haven't been able to get to yet from an individual perspective. I'll let you do this one to start here. What do you think? Do you think he's going to get to 10 this week or not?
Just the pace he's been playing at, it's frenetic recently. He's flying all over the field to make these tackles. The only thing that would make me hesitant about that is if it just comes to a game script situation where Rutgers is trying to throw to the ball to the outside and isn't making short passes over the middle that Betcher can tackle or rack up those tackles, or running the ball where Betcher can rack up those tackles. But if I had to put a number on it, I'd say, yeah, he gets the double digits again, because you look back in the Oklahoma State game, 9 tackles in that one. He has been doing this all season long. And he's the most consistent linebacker out there for this team, so he's going to be the guy that's on the field the most for sure.
I was going to say he's also a very capable linebacker in pass coverage. That actually is perhaps his biggest strength. Oh, I forgot to do it. I'm okay. Just before I do, I actually put these up here for the YouTube crowd so you can read them. I botched this on Monday with our mailbag with Zach Neal from Duckswire, where I didn't put these up until like the 5th question or 4th question or something like that. So let's move on. Let's make sure we get these up here. I spent the time to insert these into the system. I'm going to go over as well. I'm with you. Like I hesitate a little bit just because I am wondering if this is a game where Oregon does build the lead and it becomes, hey, we're going to just throw the ball a lot. We know that they throw the ball to the outside more than they do the middle of the field. And that would maybe negate some of the value or impact Bryce can have. But I'm with you. I just think his knack for finding the football stands out. And I do think, like we mentioned it with Antoine Raymond, they have a running back who they want to get involved in this game. And maybe it's a case where Bryce has 7 in the first half. They end up throwing the ball a lot in the second half, and he's still able to get, a little bit of production that second half to get to 10. All right. Second one from @Criminality. Over under combined touches for DeCorian Moore, Kenyon Sadiq at 11.5. Ooh, that's a sizable number there. I think last game they had a combined 6 or 7. That's way too low. I'm going to say over. I'm being optimistic. I think the offense figures some things out. I think they find a way to get these guys involved more. That's a pretty large number, though, so I wouldn't be surprised if it's under, but I'll be optimistic and take the over on that.
I think I'll go under, just like you said, because of where that number is at. That there were like six touches for each of those guys. That's like half the touches that Dante Moore is going to be distributing within this offense throughout the game. And we know how much Oregon does like to spread the ball around. I'd go under just because of where that number's at, but I'd like to see it in terms of where, just getting back on track within this offense and establishing those two guys. I think if that's something that happens, I'd certainly come out of this game saying Oregon did what they wanted to do offensively, in the pass game for sure.
The path to this maybe happening is a little more run game incorporation. Both of these guys, like I think think about early in the season.
True.
DeCorian with some of those jet sweeps, end arounds, even had Kenyon under, kind of in a wildcat or under center for some QB sneaks. Like maybe that's the path to getting to the 12. I agree that it's a little bit too large, maybe, but I don't know. I think Will's a guy who he's got that growth mentality, right? That's part of what Dan likes to talk about. I think they get there this week. All right. This is the last one from Twitter/X @UOR Matthews. Net sacks plus 1.5. And he explains it here. Add all the sacks by Oregon's defense and subtract all the sacks allowed by the offense. I'll let you hit this one first, John.
I like this one. I think net sacks is something we should honestly pay attention to more often, because if you are getting your defense is getting more sacks and your offense is taking, you're definitely doing things right in the game. I'd go over with this one because like we said earlier, I think Tatum Tuioti could have a big game. I'd be looking for Mateo Uiagalelei to bounce back, and I don't think Rutgers' edge rushers are going to present nearly as many problems as what Indiana was doing to Dante Moore this week.
I'm also going to take the net sack over, which favors Oregon's defense. I will say, another little tease on Skopil is I shouldn't give them all away, but I have both quarterbacks throwing for 300 yards in this game. I think both offenses are going to be throwing the ball a lot and having a lot of success. We know that's basically Rutgers' personality, their MO on offense. And I talked about it earlier. I think there's a huge opportunity for a Dante bounce back game. So I think there could be a larger total number of sacks, but I'm with you that I think Oregon's the one with more in this game, or with a little bit more success. All right. These are from the DuckTerritory message board, the Duck Pond. This is Duck John, who says Oregon secondary over under 1.5 interceptions. I'm going to go over because I'm optimistic Erik this week, and that may be a mistake. But again, when you have a team that throws, I'm doing math on the fly here, 37 contested catches over 6 games. That's just over 6 per game. and Oregon's got some size and some ball skills on the outside. It just feels like there's going to be opportunity here. So I like the over. What do you think?
Yeah, I went back and pulled up Calic Manis' game log. He's got 3 career games with 2 picks. He throws 1 a year, and they come right about in mid-October. So I think I will agree with you and go with that over. Just situationally, I think that if he is behind and throwing the ball up a lot, I think you could have a chance for a guy like Brendan Finney, if Obadegu, to make a play on one of these jump balls, and I think that's where it ends up. Maybe you get a guy like Jerry Mixon, Thieneman lurking over the middle for one of them, but I think somebody makes a play on the outside. I wouldn't even. I could definitely see that being Brandon Finney or Obadegu.
And I'll also say the last 2 games when a play has been needed to be made, the secondary has come up with it. Obviously, Penn State results in the walk-off. Last week's game didn't end up going their way, but it felt like that interception by Finney might be the necessary momentum to get over the hump there. Seems like the secondary has been pretty opportunistic. They're kind of on one right now and a favorable matchup. All right, last one here from @CBusy25. Dante Moore over under 250 pass yards. I'll just go first because I've already said I think he's going to throw for more than 300 yards. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think we're both locked in on this one. That's where the success comes from against this Rutgers team, has been other teams attacking them with the pass. Yeah, I think if Damon Williams was able to have 530 yards of total offense against this team last week, I think Dante can hit a 250 mark. That's half of that.
Yeah, and Drake.
Although he's not gonna run for 130 like Damon Williams did, but I think the 300ish should be that range that he ends up in.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think Drake Lindsey, the Minnesota quarterback, had, I want to say it was like 325 or 324, somewhere in that range. He also got over that, so I like it. Here's a bonus one from the message board I thought was fun. This is from Dr. Quacks, who listeners will know from his mailbag contributions. Over under 15 message board posts critical of Stein and Lanning if the offense doesn't score on the first drive of the game. Hit the over on that. As somebody who's been on this message board for way too long, over a decade now, probably, this is absolutely going to happen if Oregon has a rough start. And certainly I will have way more than this in my social media mentions as I'm tweeting about the punt or about the missed field goal or the turnover, whatever it is early. People will be very reactionary. I'm not necessarily faulting them. At some points, I feel like I'm kind of like a therapist, where they just kind of are getting everything that's out there. But yeah, this is what'll happen. We're not counting this towards our official count, John. But I feel pretty confident that this is an over.
I think if there's a third and long screen pass on that first drive, I think this is like I'd like double the over. If Stein dials up a push screen on 3rd and 8 because the offense is behind the sticks, yeah, I would go over as well if things aren't going right to start the game. But I think they're this week of preparation, I think they're gonna come out with a strong game script. I would expect that first drive to go right down the field for a touchdown.
Yeah, I feel good about that too. This was the last 2 weeks, the first time they really haven't opened strong. I think Northwestern also didn't score on the first drive, but like half their games they've come down and just boom, 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 looked like kind of really had things figured out, nailed the game script early. All right, John, this is the point of the show where we make our calls. We try to do better than we did last week. Once again, I'll let you go first. Give me your game score and then kind of whatever you need to get off your chest in terms of how you think this goes down.
I had this one 38-20, similar to what we've been saying all day. Like you said, with the over on that 60.5 number. That actually wouldn't quite get me there, but
you'd be under, John. You're taking the under.
Yeah, I'd be close. But I think it's just going to be a high scoring game in general. I think Oregon should push 40 points or be close to it. And I think Rutgers' offense will be able to put a touchdown or two on the board, but I think overall Oregon's defense, a unit that played a lot better than I think people give them credit for in that Indiana game. Like Fernando Mendoza was good, but he was not the player he had been throughout the rest of the season up until that point. So I think Oregon should win this one pretty comfortably. I'd be looking around a 20-point margin or so.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm going a little bit more both in terms of total score and in margin. I've got Oregon 45-21. Just this defense for Rutgers is it's hard to be optimistic. Like, here's what they've given up this year. They gave up 31 points in a narrow win over Ohio, 17 to Miami, Ohio, 10 against Norfolk State. But then these are their games in Big Ten play: 38 to Iowa, 31 to Minnesota, 38 to Washington on the road last week. it just feels like if this offense, which has undoubtedly more talent than any of those teams I just read off, that if they're playing even like a B-level game, they should get to 40 is how I really feel here. And they certainly are motivated. I know these guys know what's been said about them. I'm not saying they listen to our show by any means, but like the narrative has changed about what this offense is right now. And I know Dante Moore is very much aware of everything, and he showed so much early on in the season when things were right. They were really, really right. He looked awesome. There's a reason that several of these, NFL mock drafts still have him going first overall or in the top 5, in the top 10. The talent is still there. It's just between the ears for me. It's some of these intangible things that we've talked about with setting protections and getting everything kind of set up right before the ball's even snapped. I think if that part falls into place, the scheme advantage is there, the talent advantage is there, and he is certainly capable of pushing the ball down the field against the defense in Rutgers, which has been pretty atrocious, which is always interesting to me when you've got like a Greg Schiano, a defensive coach whose defense just isn't good. Which is unusual to me. I don't. That should be the personality of the team, and it doesn't feel like it has been. This has been a far better offensive team, and that also just hasn't been the case at Rutgers historically. So, I think this is a game. Like I said, I got a 24-point winning margin. I do think this is a game that early on there's going to be. I don't know if there's going to be 15 message posts or whatever being critical of Stein and the offense. I do think there's going to be some moments early where people are frustrated. I think a lot of that's going to be just a tip of the cap to Rutgers, because I wouldn't be surprised if they score a couple early touchdowns or even some touchdowns in the second half with just these jump balls on the outside, where they scheme it up and they get Raymond to find a crease and he's down the field for a long game that sets up points. So this is certainly a Rutgers offense that can make things interesting. I don't think their defense is good enough to keep up with Oregon. And I guess my last thing here, before we get into some kind of last final thoughts, is if this is a game where Oregon scores 28 points, right? Because I just ran through what they've given up. Rutgers has given up to Iowa, to Minnesota, and to Washington. Like if they can't get to the same total that those teams could, then you really have something to be talking about with this offense and what they really are and what their identity is. And you can really start to ask questions about where the ceiling really is. Like I can understand against Indiana, and again, John did a great job over on the website, I think on Tuesday or Wednesday, of kind of analyzing and running through sort of what the issues were and kind of some of the schematic things Indiana did. I don't imagine Rutgers is going to be able to overhaul its approach and implement this stuff at the same level, nor do they have the athletes. So if Oregon can't have success here, it becomes very clearly an Oregon problem. And I already think it was a little bit of an Oregon problem in that Indiana game, but this would really feel like what's going on here if they can't, even if they win the game 28-21, it's still a kind of a game, I think.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd be hesitant on offensively is if they just have more of a conservative game script and try to control the clock a little bit more and limit drives against a team like Rutgers, where you just keep Calic Manis and those receivers off the field. That would be the only hesitancy for me in terms of that scoring. But I think, yeah, absolutely, like you said, you should be trying to match those marks that those other teams hit against this defense, because you should feel like you're even as strong as the trio of Damon Williams, Denzel Boston, and Jonah Coleman is. You should feel like your overall what you do on offense is stronger than what UW is doing or what Iowa is doing.
Yeah, because again, if you think you're a college football playoff contender, those three teams we just talked about are quality teams. I think they're all one loss in Big Ten play right now teams. Those are not college football playoff contending teams. Like I don't know what the path for any of them getting there would be at this point. Aside from like running the table. And if you look at their schedules, that feels very unrealistic. So yeah, I feel good about this matchup, obviously picking a 24-point margin. My confidence level is rather high. Like I feel pretty good about that. At the same time, it's hard not to just have a little bit of a voice in the back of your head going, that Indiana game was so weird and wonky. Maybe this team isn't what we thought they were. I think they're going to prove they are a national championship contending team, that they are a college football playoff team this weekend, but we'll see. I felt very similarly last week and was proven very wrong.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is just Dante Moore's comfort level back there. Are the pre-snap reads and what he's seeing pre-snap, is that going to line up with what he sees post-snap? Because that was what went wrong for him so many times. Even when Rutgers wouldn't bring a blitz, and then he would, but he was still misdiagnosing based on his pre-snap reads and stuff like that. I just look for Dante Moore to feel comfortable with those things back there and not have just some of the errors that Oregon had throughout that game. There were penalties that you just felt like this team has moved beyond some of those things that they were creeping back in that Indiana game. Yeah, you just want clean operation overall to be able to come out of this Rutgers game with a win and feeling good about where you're going forward for the rest of the year.
It's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles preview edition. Kickoff 3:30 Pacific time Saturday, Big Ten Networks. Make sure you have the channel now before you get to Saturday and go, oh boy, I've got to find a new way to get the subscription procured. I will be on the podcast Saturday night along with Jackson Moore. John's going to a UFC fight, I think, so he'll be having a fun time. And either way,
watch Rainer DeRitter catch Brendan Allen in this triangle choke. It's going to be pretty good.
He's excited about that. I'm excited about this football game. I know John is too.
Yeah.
Talk to you later, folks. This has been fun.